Hey, have you ever thought about using movement as medicine? Hi, my name is Lisa Garcia, and I'm an integrative developmental and educational specialist, and my focus is helping you to reverse the learning and behavior challenges your child or student is experiencing. In today's video, I'm going to discuss how movement helps with all kinds of things, helps improve your learning, your focus, and even some of your physiological problems. But first, hit the subscribe button below so you'll be the first to know when I post a new piece of content. So we know that the brain is a complex structure and it controls basically everything in our body, such as heartbeat, the way we perceive the world, and also the way we move. On our head, we have the motor strip or the motor cortex. So right here, this area right here is the motor strip. And right behind it is the somatosensory cortex. So we have the motor strip here and the sensory part here. So this is where we receive messages from our muscles, and then the motor cortex sends the messages down to the muscles. So interestingly, 80% of the signals are actually coming up to the brain and 20% are going back down. The motor cortex is one of the first areas in the cortex to develop, and it's developed through movement. When we engage in movement, then we help develop the adjacent areas of the brain, such as vision and thought. If a child is unable to move through the confines of severe cerebral palsy, for example, then it's very likely that he or she will also have difficulties with vision or other mental learning difficulties. This is the case too if a baby was confined to a crib or a car seat or a walker for long periods of time and were not allowed to be kind of free and explore and move. When I was living in Japan, this is probably now about 5 years ago, I was taking a course, and one of the gals she was Japanese, and she was working in the Iwakuni, not Iwakuni, but Iwajima, not Iwajima. Anyway, Nagasaki. She was working in Nagasaki. I don't know why that mattered. And in the schools, and she was like an itinerant teacher, and an itinerant teacher basically has a caseload of students, and she goes from school to school to school, and she has to kind of oversee their program. And she had one student who was 9 years old, severe cerebral palsy, who was very spastic, so he was very rigid. He couldn't move on his own, and so he basically kind of laid down in a very rigid state. And he was 9 years old. He was blind. Lots of issues. She gave the teacher a 20-minute a day literally, she just told the teacher, just do these exercises for 20 minutes a day. They had to do them passively because he could not do them. That means that they did the activity for him. The motor cortex does not know the difference between you doing the initiating the movement or somebody else. There's other parts of the brain that I think do, but the motor cortex, basically, if it moves, it's moving. So they did these exercises 20 minutes a day. It was July, August, September, October, November, like 4 months later. She had videotapes of these. And 4 months later, this little boy, he was wearing glasses. He was in a walker, for his size, they made for his size. He was walking around the room. He very much knew where he was going. And that was just in 4 months' time of just having some intentional movement added to his program. The motor cortex is not the only part of the brain that's in charge of movement. So we have the basal ganglia, which is in the very center of the brain, and we have the cerebellum, which is this part back here, way at the bottom of the brain. It's called the mini brain. The basal ganglia is a group of nuclei that are in charge of housing the complex motor patterns, and it's involved in such cases like Parkinson's, Huntington's, anything that's kind of motor related, and also the cerebellum. And That is in charge of smoothing out the motor signal and is involved with balance and coordination amongst a bunch of other things. It's called the mini brain. There's more neurons in the cerebellum than the entire rest of the cortex. So those two areas are also involved in movement, involved in actually the basal ganglia is also involved in inhibition of movement, which is why with Parkinson's, as the cells die, the tremors start, because the basal ganglia, when it's fully active, it's able to inhibit movement. So that's part of what it does. So there are things that directly affect the movement centers, especially the basal ganglia and the cerebellum, and gluten is the biggest culprit, or one of them. Alcohol is too, but probably because it's full of gluten. This is why when someone who's drunk loses their balance. So when when people are drunk, it's a cerebellar thing. When a person, if the gluten is causing that, people can look drunk from gluten, and it's called gluten ataxia. The basal ganglia is also affected by the strep virus when you get a strep throat. So if you ever see anything like PANDAS, and that's what PANDAS is. So PANDAS is, it looks like autism, but it is the onset is strep. Another thing that affects movement is the unintegration of primitive reflexes. So our primitive reflexes are located mostly in the brain stem, which is down below, and then specific movements help them to integrate and mature the brain stem. And as it matures, it's able to create a stronger connection to the higher areas of the brain, such as the basal ganglia, the thalamus, and the frontal lobes. So it creates these neural pathways all the way up to the front of the brain. And of course, the frontal lobe is in charge of our executive functioning. So the ability to move well has a significant impact on cognitive performance. Movement can also have an impact on pain. Oftentimes people are experiencing pain due to low proprioceptive awareness of their joints and their muscles, and movement can help build up that awareness, thus reducing the pain. So proprioceptive awareness, for example, is like if you had your if you had your arm out here, and then are you able to match your other arm with your eyes closed to this arm? Oh, I was slightly off. Okay, so anyway, proprioceptive, if you had 3 fingers up behind your back, would you know that it was 3? Okay, so that's proprioceptive awareness. It's aware and knowing where your body is in space. Brain Gym is a system that's designed to use movements in order to help with stress reduction, and which we know can have all sorts of mental and physiological impacts on the body. We looked at that in the last video and in other videos. So just anything, movement can help reduce stress, and we know that when the stress is high, not only is there problems up in the brain, but it starts that cascade of physiological problems all over the body. So if you or your child are experiencing any kind of motor coordination issues, and you may be interested in learning how to test your primitive reflexes, and we've talked more about primitive reflexes in other videos, and we will again in future videos. I have a primitive reflex tutorial that will help you learn how, and you can click on the link in the description to learn more. Or if you're interested in learning about Brain Gym, especially if you're a school or a teacher and you have a group of students that you want to work with, then contact me directly and we can set that up.